So far, we've talked quite a bit about just different aspects of economics. Let's go ahead and formally define the term economics. Economics is a social science that deals with how consumers, producers, and societies choose among the alternative use of scarce resources. How are they going to use scarce resources? How are consumers, producers, and societies going to use those scarce resources? And how are they going to use them in the process of producing, exchanging, and consuming goods and services? So whenever we talk about it being a social science, we are going to use that term social science because it's looking at human behavior. How are humans interacting? How are societies acting? If you compare that to other types of sciences such as biology and chemistry, those sciences, they develop laws, and those laws hold true 100% of the time. Well, in economics, we actually use economic laws such as law of supply and law of demand, which you'll learn later on, and through those laws are based off of human interaction. But do all humans act the same every single time? Actually, they don't. So we call this a social science because it's dealing with human behavior, and that human behavior doesn't always hold true. We can develop laws based off of how people act normally, but there might be an outlier, might be somebody that doesn't act rationally, so it winds up becoming this social science that's dealing with human behavior. And it's looking at how are these humans interacting to use these scarce resources. How are they going to allocate or use these scarce resources? How are they going to choose among them? And they're going to be using that in the process of producing, exchanging, and consuming those goods and services. Now we can break economics down into two main sections. These two main sections are microeconomics and macroeconomics. And within microeconomics, what microeconomics does is it focuses on the behavior of individual agents. How are individuals working, or how are individual groups of agents working? So it's looking at how does an individual producer react? How does an individual consumer react? What do they do? How do they behave? How does a single group behave? So it's looking at individuals. And what are individuals, how are individuals going to choose how to use those different resources? Then we have, again, microeconomics can be broken up into two main sections. First one is microeconomics of consumption, and then microeconomics of production, or microeconomics of consumers, microeconomics of producers. So consumers are those that are going to be buying the goods and services. Those are those who demand the goods and services. They're going to be consuming those goods and services, using them up. So the microeconomics of consumption, or microeconomics of consumers, looks at how individual buyers, individual people that are buying these goods, how are they buying these goods? What are they using it for? How are they going to use them up? So it's looking at who demands those goods and services. On the other side, you have this microeconomics of producers, or production. Microeconomics of production looks at the individuals who are supplying those goods and services. So a microeconomics of production might be looking at, well, what is the profit maximizing level of input, or what is the profit maximizing amount of fertilizer that this farmer needs to use? And it's going to be looking at individual producers. Or it might be, how does this individual firm increase their sales? Something of that nature. But the key words that whenever you're hearing this, it's looking at individual producers for the microeconomics of production. And then you also, under microeconomics, you get into what's known as price determination, and looking at how the markets interact, how buyers and sellers interact in order to determine the market price, or what is the price of a good. So microeconomics also deals with price determination. So some key points that I want you to remember under this microeconomics is, first off, is how individual producers and consumers behave. Looking at how individuals behave. How is this individual person going to buy? How is this individual person going to produce that good? So whenever you think about microeconomics, think of the term micro as small. Think about a small entity, a small portion of the whole picture. So it's individuals, and think small. Next, we get into macroeconomics. So macroeconomics focuses on the broad aggregates of the economy. What that basically means is it's focusing on the whole economy. Whenever we start dealing with macroeconomics, we're looking at what is going on in the whole entire economy. We're looking at aspects such as GDP, or the gross domestic product of a whole nation, a whole economy. We're looking at unemployment rate within the economy. We're looking at inflation across the economy. Looking at monetary and fiscal policies, trade balance and national debt, and then interest rate. Whenever we go through these, all of these affect the whole economy, or the broad aggregates of the economy. We're not looking at individuals. We're not looking at small portions of it. We're looking at the whole economy of a nation, of an area, of a region, or maybe even just the whole economy of the whole world. And the macroeconomics will start dealing with stuff such as GDP, unemployment, inflation, all of these aspects. So whenever you think about macroeconomics, think about the whole economy and think big. Macro, the root word of macro means big. So think about the whole economy whenever you think about macroeconomics. Now, do microeconomics and macroeconomics go hand in hand? Yes, they do. So think about it this way. Producers and consumers, they actually make decisions based off of the macroeconomy. You've got a new farmer a farmer that's thinking about going out and buying a new tractor, and say they want to buy this new tractor, put it on a loan with an interest rate. Well, the interest rate is actually an aspect of the macroeconomy, and the interest rate is determined through basically the macroeconomy. And that farmer then looks at that interest rate and says, well, that interest rate's too high and I can't afford that tractor now, so he doesn't buy the tractor. So this producer's decision was just based off of the macroeconomy. Or if the interest rate was really low, they would have been able to buy that tractor. So producers and consumers often make decisions based off of the macroeconomy. On the other side, the macroeconomy is made up of all the producers and the consumers. So as a whole, if all of the producers begin to change, then it's going to change the macroeconomy. Or if, say, for example, the interest rate begins to become too high and producers and consumers can no longer afford to buy things using loans, and they stop buying as many goods under loans, it's actually going to drive the interest rate down. So what we see is that the macroeconomy and the microeconomy actually goes hand in hand. And we see that the macroeconomy influences the microeconomy, while the microeconomy basically makes up the macroeconomy. So both of these actually just go right hand in hand. So one thing that you need to actually be careful of as we go through the section dealing with macroeconomy is that you need to be careful whenever discussing the aggregate. And there's actually a fallacy called the fallacy of composition. And the fallacy of composition states what is true of some may not be true of all. So an example of that might be you go to a football game and you're sitting in the stands at the football game and everybody's sitting down, and you decide that if you stand up you can get a better view. Well, the idea would be, well, if you can get a better view, if you as an individual can get a better view by standing up, then everybody would be able to get a better view by standing up. Well, that's simply not true. And that's actually what is true of an individual is actually not true of everybody. So the fallacy of composition says what's true of some may not be true of all. So you've got to be careful of that, because if you say something along the lines of this farmer could increase their yield by using this piece of equipment, therefore increasing their total revenue, and the prices are going to stay the same by increasing if that single farmer increases their yield, and everybody, or then he makes more money, makes a higher amount of revenue, higher amount of profit. And if you say, well, if he uses this new equipment and he makes a higher profit, then everybody else that uses this equipment will make a higher profit as well. You're taking what one person does and applying it to the whole economy. But that's simply not going to be the case, because as the yield increases, the prices are brought down, and it winds up you might not even make as much as you did before. So you got to be careful when discussing the aggregate because of this fallacy of composition.